Good morning, friends. Today I am going to talk about the concept and measures of measurement of incidence of taxation. I had my lecture in the last week presented something which is called the basic tenets of taxation, which is already available in the YouTube. Let me go to the concept and measurement of incident or incidence of taxation. So normally the question of incidence of taxation has been of long-standing interest and intense debate among professional economists. It is one of those economic questions, the interest in which is shared by political leaders and the public at large, because taxes are seen and are felt to affect the lives of the households and fortunes of the business. The incidence of taxation has traditionally been defined to mean the final resting place of the money burden of taxation. So if we subscribe this, then only we need to in fact go to the details of it. For every unit of revenue raised by government, that means there is a corresponding reduction in the income of someone or another, and you're tracing the incidence of this taxes, therefore to find out whose income or whose incomes are reduced as a result of the imposition of that particular tax. Going behind the monetary phenomena, one could consider the action of the government in terms of the use of real resources. So generally speaking, it could be said that the government uses the tax proceeds to divert real resources to itself, and that this cause a reduction in the real income available for private use. The incidence of taxation is on those who ultimately suffer the reduction in real incomes equivalent in total to the amount of resources which the government has appropriated. So a measure of incidence is hence obtained by expressing the money burden as a percentage of the money income of the individual or a group which is concerned. Now, besides enabling the government to transfer real resources to itself, which is called the tax, maybe, that is, the tax may have other effects. They often interfere with consumers' choice and distorts expenditure patterns. They may lead to less efficient use of factor inputs and thus affect total output. And they may affect the rate of savings and investment and hence the rate of growth as such. So all these effects may impose additional burdens and hence the total reduction in income available for private use caused by a tax may be greater than that of the corresponding to the amount of revenue obtained. So this point is very crucial as far as the incidence of taxation is concerned. However, these secondary uh, effects are generally excluded from the concept and measurement of incidence of taxation. And attention is concentrated on the direct money burden as being the most important aspect of the matter, which we have discussed in the beginning. So the traditional concept of incidence has been criticized in recent years, and new ways of looking at the question have been suggested. It is pointed out that taxation by itself does not cause a reduction in real income available for private use. It is public expenditure that absorbs real resources. Taxes may be increased or reduced for any number of reasons without changing the level of real public expenditure. It is argued that, therefore, the taxation only changes the distribution of income, and that the incidence of taxation should accordingly be defined as the change in the distribution of real income available for the private use. So the magnitude and nature of change in real income can only be studied by comparing two situations. That is, the state distribution before the tax with that of after the imposition of tax, or the situation without and with the tax. So this is a comparative point which everyone has to keep in mind. The problem here is that if you assume that a tax is imposed or an existing tax increased, something else also changes. That is, either public expenditure increases or there will be a change in the budget balance. In either the case, the change in the distribution of real income will due to the combined effects of tax and something else and not those of tax alone. So that means any change is actually comes with a multitude of facts. In that context, Professor Musgrave has suggested that the combined effects of an equal increase in tax and public expenditure might be termed the budget incidence. So this is very important concept, that is, the budget incidence are the incidence that the combined effect of an equal increase in tax and public expenditure. Okay, so if the effect on the distribution of a given tax is to be isolated, other things must be held constant. This can only be done by replacing one tax by another of equal yield. Now the distributional consequence of substituting one tax for another of equal yield is termed as a very different tax, which is called the differential incidence. Currently, most fiscal theorists or the economists seems to prefer the concept of differential incidence than the Musgravian budget incidence. However, the concept of differential incidence relate to a change in the tax system. It cannot, strictly speaking, be applied to measure the incidence of an existing structure of taxation. On the other hand, if one wished to apply the concept of budget incidence, one would have to compare two situations, the state of distribution without a budget and that with the existing budget, but it's impossible to wish away the entire budget, for it would make no sense to make a comparison with the state of the economy without a government. Some writers try to get out of this difficulty by assuming that the existing tax system is being substituted for a hypothetical neutral tax, such as a proportional income tax of equal yield or something like that. But this conceptual device would make no differences or difference to the numerical results. One would get the same result if one simply measured the absolute incidence of the system as such. So this has also been discussed, and despite the theoretical argument that several economists have adduced in favor of the concept of differential incidence, the fact remains that the public are interested in knowing whether the existing tax system distributes the burden in an equitable manner. So equity consideration comes in the foray. While from the econometric point of view, the concept of differential incidence lend itself to more accurate measurement, it would by no means be illegitimate to ask the question who pays the existing taxes. Although there are difficulties in providing an accurate quantitative answer in the present exercise, according to our terms of references, we shall be attempting to measure the incidence of an existing system of indirect taxes in India on the implicit assumption that the volume and pattern of government expenditure is given and that all the tax revenue is spent. So this is what is we think in terms of the real outcome or the kind of a presentation of what we have done. So the theory of incident in economic literature is largely based on deductive reason, and we know that the deductive reason comprises the very the facet of what we discussed, and it attempts to trace the directions and the relative magnitude of shifting of a particular tax under different circumstances. So one way of measuring the incidence of a given tax or a set of taxes is to quantify the conclusion of such deductive reasoning. However, the result of this reasoning are not always logically conclusive. And furthermore, one would like to empirically test conclusions based on deductive reasoning before applying them to real world situation. Because there, one should prefer the alternative method of specifying tentative hypotheses regarding shifting and econometrically testing them. The result of the econometric exercise would provide the empirical basis for working out the incidence of the tax system. While this might be the conceptually perfect solution, formidable statistical and other difficulties arises in carrying out the needed econometric exercise. So this is the challenge. In fact, in order to deal satisfactorily with the broad-based taxes such as you know excise and the general GST, sales tax or whatever, not sales tax now, GST VAT, we would need a full-fledged econometric modeling of the economy. So now many people were trying to or they are trying to do this kind of exercise. The formulation and estimation of such a model for India is actually posing a little challenge because of the nature of our data set as well as the information which is available to all of us. So again, the econometric method is more relevant for measurement of different incidents than for estimating the incident of an existing tax system. For these reasons, we have to take recourse to the method of quantifying the conclusion of deductive reasoning in the theory of incidence. Commodity taxes could be, for example, selective or general. It is generally argued that the incidence of a selective tax on a commodity would be divided between buyers and the producer or the factor owners in the proportion of the price elasticity of the supply of the commodity to the elasticity of demand for it. So only if the supply were perfectly elastic, the entire burden would be shifted to the consumers. Conversely, some can argue that only if the demand were perfectly elastic, the entire burden would remain with the factor owners. That is, the elasticity of supply depends critically or crucially upon the capacity of the scope for the factor production and taxed industry to move to untaxed fields. So if the factor of production is specific to the particular industry, that is the industry which is taxed, then it would have to stay there and accept a certain earning. On the other hand, if the factor is capable of being employed in alternative industries, some units of the factor would move out. So the supply of that factor to the taxed industry would be cut and the level of earning would not be significantly affected. The price of the product would correspondingly rise. Now, some could also argue that in the short run, it may not be possible for several factors of production to move out of a taxed industry. Okay, this is in fact a very rational point which somebody can argue. So in the long run, however, new possibilities and vistas may open up. Old machines get worn out and need not be replaced, and similarly the existing workforce is not fully replaced, etc. So as time passes, therefore, supply can be expected to become more and more elastic. Hence, the assumption that in the long run supply is more or less perfectly elastic and that the incidence of a selective commodity tax will be fully shifted onto consumer. But still, in that long run is actually kind of an enveloping of the short run, which is not as responsive as we think, because every point it is having a static nature. But we theoretically, when we deal with it, we also try to ignore this particular fact. So let us now consider a general exercise or any VAT tax falling or all commodity and services kind of thing. One school of thought believes that if such a tax were to be levied at one rate covering all goods and services, it would be equivalent to a proportional income tax on all factors earning. This conclusion is based on reasoning that since all industries are taxed, there are no untaxed fields to which factors could migrate even in the long run in an effort to avoid a cut in their earnings as a result of the tax. So this means that all factors will have to accept a proportionate reduction in their incomes. So this is what is in the last lecture we were pointing out, that the first thing which we have to keep in mind is that we are subscribing to the fact that tax is a fact and it is essential to run the show or the business as such. So one could even assume in that context that prices arise as a result of the tax, but since the general tax applies to consumer goods as well as the capital goods, consumer as well as investors will be affected. So in other words, tax will fall on consumption and saving, which is equal to income. Thus, it is argued whether the general price level raises or not as a result of the tax, the burden of tax will be distributed in proportion to incomes of different people. That is why this proportionate income tax being treated as the progressive taxation as far as the last lecture is concerned, because I keep telling that proportional income tax is actually it can be only the progressive in the income tax. So in examining the above view, one has to rule out the hypothetical case in which prices do not rise as a result of the general tax. Okay, since we are assuming that all tax revenue is spent, the demand for factors and factor income will not fall and price will have to rise. The argument of such writers as far as Musgrave that even if price rises, the burden of the general tax is distributed in proportion to the income and not consumption is based on the premises that the tax on capital goods rest on the investors. A more plausible view is that in course of time, the tax on a capital goods also will be shifted to the consumer, to the products for whose manufacture the former are used. So in this if this happen, the burden of a general commodity tax will rest ultimately with the consumer. So the point is very simple. Any tax at any point of time, any point of any given tax, if you consider that the final resting place of the tax is going to be the consumer, which is all of us. So this is, in that sense, the incident of tax is actually what is called the final resting place of the tax is being rationalized. Whether it is on the first point or the second, the budget, the incident, or the other, the differential incident, doesn't matter. But the resting place of the tax burden is ultimately the consumer. So even this last conclusion will be fully valid only on the assumption of the existence of competition and the long-run mobility of factors of production and the absence of the control to markets and wholly specific factor of production such as land that can be put to only one use. All these assumptions and the reasoning given in the previous discussion are implicit in the view that all commodity taxes are sooner or later fully shifted to the consumer. Since every one of the needed assumption will not always be fulfilled, this view of an incidence uh, uh, will not turn out to be entirely correct. Moreover, since considerable time may elapse before certain factors can move out of various taxed industries, part of the incident of a number of tax may be on the producer at any given time. But however, what the final point of that resting, maybe it is temporal, but the final is always with the consumer. So what may broadly be true, however, is that the major part of the burden of the commodity tax or any kinds of tax as a whole will be on the consumer. This is true in the case of any GST or any kind of thing. The final resting place of this burden is with the consumer in the present. So in that context, if you understand the incident, the concept and nature of the incident is always falls on the consumer's shoulder. So with this point, I would like to conclude the point, the topic which I am intended to convey, that the concept and measurement of incident. Thank you.